statutory factors, the nature and circumstances of the offense committed by the defendant. The crimes are fully described in prior sections titled Prelude, Why Did This Happen, and July 16, 2011. No further factual summation is required. Nonetheless, it is imperative to stress that these facts reflect, and the court finds that the defendant displayed perverse premeditation, heartless cruelty and savagery, extreme violence, a willingness to mutilate, and absolute depravity. Concerning that the victims were blood relatives and were killed up close and personally with a handheld tool, it is obvious the defendant was fueled by a long, simmering, passionate hatred toward those who loved him the most. These were not long-distance, impersonal shootings. The court concedes the defense argument that this is not a death penalty case and that the statutory aggravators are not required to be applied. They are not statutorily required factors. Nonetheless, they were painstakingly and thoughtfully drafted and enacted in order to describe the nature and attributes of severe criminal conduct, justifying the system's harshest punishment. For that purpose, the court finds they are useful to describe Hadley's motives and conduct in this case. Considering the aggravators in that light, the court is compelled to make the following factual findings. 1, the killings were done in part for financial gain. 2, these were serial murders. He committed 2 capital murders, one after the other. The killings were clearly heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and they were the product of calculated and heightened premeditation without any justification. B, the effect of the crime on the victim's family and the community. Obviously, these murders devastated the victims' families. Parents were lost, a husband and wife were lost, a son and daughter were lost, a brother and sister were lost, an aunt and uncle were lost. These killings created a large, gaping void in the Hadley family. The devastation was so severe that a once friendly extended family is now born in 2. Hadley's paternal relatives no longer have any contact with his maternal relatives. Additionally, these crimes were front-page news throughout the Treasure Coast, even garnering national news coverage. These killings both shocked and disgusted the community. C, the defendant's age, maturity, intellectual capacity, and mental and emotional health at the time of the offense. At the time of the killings, Hadley was 17, 6.5 months shy of his 18th birthday. Legally, there is no doubt that he was a juvenile on July 16, 2011, and entitled to the legal rights and protections that come with that status. However, it is of some relevance that he was closer to 18 than he was to 14. There's a big difference between a high school senior and a freshman. Expert testimony described Hadley as having the maturity level of a 13 or 14-year-old teenager. This may have hindered his appreciation of the long-term consequences of his actions and his ability to cope with his parents' efforts to curb his behavior. Murder is sudden and permanent. Resolving parent-child conflict typically doesn't happen overnight, but with time, effort, and professional assistance, it can eventually be resolved. He clearly was unwilling to avail himself of the chances he had at Riga. He needed to get sober and get on with honesty-based counseling. He uttered no plea for help to anyone and lied to the Riga counselors, giving them no accurate glimpse into his true thoughts and feelings. From the start, he set out to sabotage the Riga program, and he did. Whatever it took, he was going to continue to chill, and he was not going to do inpatient rehab. Experts testified that Hadley's intelligence level was average to above average. The facts revealed that these crimes did not involve below normal thinking. Instead, their planning and execution reflected logical and complex thinking. His intelligence allowed him to exhibit some mature thinking and significant decisions he made. As argued by the state, he initially was smart enough to refuse the police entry into his home. He knew if he let them in, bad things would happen. He also wisely and maturely chose to remain silent. After his arrest, he feigned psychotic symptoms, thinking it would help him in his legal predicament. Initially, the mental health professionals believed his lies. Eventually, he admitted that he had lied and has since proclaimed a vow of honesty. Hadley suffered from a constellation of negative mental and emotional conditions. From an early age, he lacked self-confidence and self-esteem. He showed symptoms of depression and anxiety. He was diagnosed with conduct disorder at adolescent onset. At some point, he was diagnosed with ADHD. And from his early years, he was a substance abuser. From anyone's viewpoint, he was a very unhappy and angry young man. His unhappiness was apparent. Unfortunately for Mr. and Mrs. Hadley, his seething anger was not. The defense expert suggested that Hadley's prescribed medications for his various maladies, particularly the SSRIs, may have contributed to his anger and aggression. That suggestion is simply not supported by the evidence. At the time he was taking the medicines, nobody, neither a medical professional nor a family member, reported any acts of aggression, angry outbursts, or hostility. The combination of Hadley's maturity level, mental and emotional health do suggest that his judgment and decision-making might have been impaired to some extent. No one can opine with any certainty as to what extent these conditions may have contributed to his actions, and no one can predict how his judgment and decision-making might evolve in the future. D. The defendant's background, including his or her family, home, and community development. Everyone who knew Mr. and Mrs. Hadley described them as good and loving parents. There was absolutely no hint of neglect or abuse. Hadley's mother was a highly regarded school teacher, and his father worked for the local power company. He had a loving, extended family with aunts, uncles, and grandparents. He was supported monetarily without reservation. He was clothed, fed, and housed. His parents were regular churchgoers, and they took him with them to Sunday Mass. His parents had no vices, no alcohol or drug issues. The bottom line is that Hadley was loved and cared for unconditionally. Nothing about his family situation is even remotely relevant to these crimes. E. The effect, if any, of maturity, impetuosity, or failure to appreciate risks and consequences on the defendant's participation in the offense. To an extent, Hadley's maturity level may have inhibited his ability to consider the long-term consequences of his actions. Without question, however, he had to realize that there were only two possible outcomes for him. He would either end his own life, or he was going to be in custody for a long, long time. He could not have possibly contemplated that his life would just go on as always, or that he would escape and get away with it. He also knew he had options, namely, honestly commit to counseling, abstinence, and give school an honest effort. Of course, from his perspective, these were hard, uncomfortable choices, and he defiantly rejected them. With respect to legal risks, he clearly knew he was headed for only one of two possible outcomes as reflected above. As to risks of his plan failing, he made sure there would be none. By waiting for his brother to move out, by choosing his weapon beforehand, waiting for his parents to separate into different rooms, and by hiding their cell phones, he cleverly minimized any possible chance of failure. These crimes were simply not impulsive. They were not triggered by any one event. They were planned carefully. Hadley did what he had long wanted to do. Impulsivity is simply irrelevant. F. The extent of the defendant's participation in the offense. Hadley was the only person who thought of doing this. He was the only one who planned it. He was the only one who did it. Nobody else was involved. G. The effect, if any, of familial pressure or peer pressure on the defendant's action. There was absolutely no family pressure causing Hadley to do what he did. None. With regard to his peers, they clearly were not the best examples of model teenage behavior. However, none of them even remotely suggested to him that he should react violently towards his parents. When they shrugged off his statements about killing his parents, he made no effort to convince them of his sincerity. In hindsight, things might have been different if one of them had reported his statements to law enforcement, but that would have required psychic ability. In any event, this factor speaks to pressure which induces or influences someone to commit a crime. Whether a peer or a family member does not intervene and prevent someone from committing a crime is not contemplated by the statute. H. The nature and extent of the defendant's prior criminal history. Hadley had no record of prior arrests or convictions. That does not mean, however, he had not committed crimes. In several interviews, he self-reported instances of drug sales, drug purchases, drug usage, vandalism, strong-arm robberies, thefts, burglaries, and driving while impaired. While there was nothing in his record to predict his murderous behavior, it is clear he was headed to adult criminal court and adult sanctions. The lack of a prior conviction for violent crimes, given his other behaviors, is of minor significance. The effect, if any, of the characteristics attributable to the defendant's youth on the defendant's judgment. These crimes were not impulsive acts. Impulsivity was not a factor. These murders were thought about months before they occurred. They were painstakingly planned. As previously discussed, he was facing temporary hurdles. He needed to understand that they would have passed. He could have moved on. The fact that he chose such an immediate and drastic final solution does not reflect impulsivity. Instead, it showed his unwillingness to change his course. He chose to ignore the obvious conclusion that his perceived solution was no solution at all, and how much the circumstance attendant to youth caused this criminal conduct is impossible for anyone to tell. The other factors attendant to defendant's youth have been previously discussed in the sections above. J. The possibility of rehabilitating the defendant. Since July 17, 2011, Hadley has been in custody either in county jails or the Department of Corrections for over 7 years. His prison record reveals that he is mostly a compliant inmate doing his best to stay under the radar. He did qualify as a certified teaching assistant but lost his job because he failed to show up for his assignment for 2 weeks. He explained his absence as not wanting to provoke other inmates who envied his certification. He received a disciplinary report for his absences, and he currently holds a position of trust as a library assistant. His other mishap occurred when he was found in possession of a weapon, namely a shank. He claimed he had been attacked, and another inmate gave it to him so he could protect himself. He denied ever using it. He received another disciplinary report for this incident. His record of achievement while in custody has been slightly positive, a good sign, but certainly not conclusive that his rehabilitation has started and will be successful. It is impossible to resolve this factor with a yes or no answer. To his credit, he has not been violent, has avoided violence, he belongs to no gangs, avoids the underground prison economy, and except for one self-reported incident involving marijuana, has avoided drugs. As to Hadley's threat of future violence, Dr. Daniel A. Martell, based on psychological testing, expressed concern regarding that possibility. He described Hadley as someone who suppresses anger and holds it in, making him prone to outbursts. He also warned that people around Hadley would not know about the building anger until the outburst occurred. As stated in his own words, "What the picture I get is a guy who's kind of seething with anger and violent ideation, but holds it in tightly, and so a couple of things come from that. And then 3, it can occasionally result in explosive outbursts." And that's from the September 18th deposition at lines 67:14 through 18. He also testified in his deposition that part of the reason for his concern regarding these traits is, it's I think what we saw in the instant offense, and I'm concerned. Given his past and current youth, it is clear he has a lot of work ahead of him. He will need to engage in deep introspection and develop self-awareness to understand understand how and why he got to where he is. Based on his August 14th, 2018 interview with Dr. Martell, he still seems lost as to why and how it all changed. As an example, consider the following exchange. And I'm not going to read all that's here, but I'll read some of the portions. Dr. Martell, so what is it you're thinking about when that happens? Mr. Hadley, no, I'm just thinking about things that, I could have done different, or maybe I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have, like just things about like, that nobody would be in this situation right now. Like, okay, I should have just went to school, or should have just went to, it's just like little things. Like, okay, if you would have done that, things would have been different. Tell me a little more about that. Well, I just sit there and think, okay, well, if I would have done